Folks, welcome back to So Bad It's Good. Today, I want to talk about a really important series that just premiered. It's part of ABC News Studio, and you can find it on Hulu. It's a docuseries called The Murder Has Two Faces. It's hosted by the amazing Robin Roberts. It's a three-part docuseries, and it really does shine a light on social justice with lesser-known cases, and it kind of juxtaposes that with more well-known cases that we have kind of has taken the spotlight in a lot of ways and has overshadowed some of these other cases. Now, each episode unravels a crime that shares these kind of uncanny similarities with high-profile cases, including Laci Peterson, Shandra Levy, and the Craigslist killer. And it brings a light to similar cases like Evelyn Hernandez, Joyce Chiang, and Sarah Butler. Now, this is actually executive produced and directed by the Emmy Award-winning Lisa Cortes, who is our guest today. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan. Oh my gosh, can you come everywhere with me and introduce me in the series?
I feel like I screwed up. I was tripping over my words. I'm kind of nervous to speak with you because I just got finished watching all three episodes of this. And I have to tell you, all kidding aside, this really moved me in a way that I don't think I was prepared for, especially the third episode about the tag killer. And I was so moved by this whole series. And I think sometimes we sensationalize true crime. And this really brought a spotlight to where a spotlight needs to be brought. And I just wondered, was that your initial intent in getting involved in something like this?
Yeah. As a storyteller, I am all forever curious about hidden figures and hidden histories. And when I looked at how I wanted to express myself and in the true crime space, I knew I didn't want to chase after the same stories that everyone is looking at. But it was so important to bring a new lens, a social justice perspective, particularly when we discovered that there were these intense parallels between well-known stories and lesser-known stories that share the same DNA. Yeah. That's the part that's kind of like mind-boggling, is how close so many of the characteristics, the city, the age that these different victims share. But like, we've heard about one and we haven't heard about the other.
I mean, and your first episode, which focuses on Evelyn Hernandez, and it juxtaposes that with Laci Peterson, and Laci Peterson was all over the news. Scott Peterson is still in the news to this day, and I had never heard of this before. I had never heard of Evelyn Hernandez before. And just so the audience, if you have not watched yet, she was a pregnant mother who disappeared, and she had a 5-year-old son. And there were so many striking similarities, so much so that you pointed out that Mark Garagos at one point tried to tie it in with the Scott Peterson case with Laci Peterson. When was the first time you had heard about Evelyn Hernandez's story?
When we were developing the series, we started with the A story, like the well-known story. And we realized that the unknown story was not the B story, but it was the A story. And to see that there had been a couple of small local hits for Evelyn, who basically disappears in May of 2002. Laci disappears in December of 2002, and her body is found in 2003. You start to pull the thread, right?
Yeah.
And you follow where the thread takes you. And going backwards from Laci, we landed directly at Evelyn's story.
And it's really this kind of a beautiful story in a sense of talking about immigration and talking about how hard it is to come over to this country. In a way, is that these promises of dreams, and she lands in the Mission District, and it is this kind of, there's a lot of struggle that goes along with this American dream, and it is so tragic how her story ended. But I thought that was such an interesting point to point out, is, you're coming here for this better life, but how much work goes into that better life, is that it's not just all sunshine and roses. And obviously, this ended so horrifically, but I thought that was such an interesting point. And I was wondering, when you look at these cases and when you were doing your research, What is the benefit of being able to look back on something by decades?
Well, this happened in 2002, and so many of the people who were involved are still around. And anytime you can look at something through the rearview mirror, you're going to, I think, see things closer than you did maybe when you were entrenched in so much tragedy and sadness. But you're also going to see a broader perspective of things that you might have missed because you were so focused on what is. I can't imagine that type of pain and loss.
Yeah.
But what's so cool about the series is we have archival from 2002. We have archival from when Evelyn, as a young girl, came to this country from El Salvador.
Yeah.
Holly Pera, this detective who was investigating the original disappearance and murder, she is retired, but is still actively involved, helping the cold case unit to still find who killed Evelyn. And as she says, there are some cases that haunt you forever. So it's really beautiful to see that in the case of the police, there were people who cared, such as Holly, and a new detective who's involved, who are still trying to get answers, get closure for the family, and possibly find, the 5-year-old son, Alex, who would be 27 now, and his baby brother who was unborn, and though they were never found.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a haunting detail to the entire story. And this is why it's important to shed light on these things. Also, I just thought it was also another point that her sister, Evelyn's
Raina.
sister is deaf, and I think that first when the cops came to interview her, they were scared they didn't have an ASL interpreter, and I thought she was wanting to tell her story in these details, and they were able to understand her. But I thought that was another interesting piece of this puzzle. And you say when you're doing these interviews, these very personal interviews, and is it something where you're feeling their pain still decades later?
Well, we're joined by the incredible journalist Robin Roberts, who appears in the series. She's never done any true crime before. And you will see when she's conducting, these interviews. There's one episode I always remember that this little tear just like crept down Robin's cheek, because you can't help but revisit the all these years later, the time,
Yeah.
and to really feel, if you have any touch of empathy, what these families have gone through.
Yeah, I mean, Robin Roberts is such a trusted voice in news, and it's just like when you see her, there is such a gravitas where she's feeling, she's strong, she's like you trust her to take you through these stories, and I was kind of in awe of watching her as well. Episode 2, you juxtapose Shandra Levy with Joyce Chiang, and what were the similarities in that for you in these cases?
Well, that's an episode that takes place in Washington, D.C. These were both young women with amazing futures ahead of them. Obviously, Shandra, they were both working in government. Joyce was an attorney. They lived in the same neighborhood, DuPont Circle, and they disappeared mysteriously into and with no traces as to what happened to them. And so one of the things about the series is that each city was influenced cinematically by
Yeah.
someone who's done a lot of work there. So in episode 2 in DC, it's like a mini tribute, if you know where to look, for David Fincher. There's touches of Gone Girl
I love
and
that.
and
Sorry.
House of Cards, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we have tools as storytellers to do new interviews, to do stylized recreations with no actors, to have great archival footage, but we also wanted to lean into the location as a character. So in San Francisco, it's Hitchcock. The fog is rolling in, the music is ominous. DC is Fincher, and the third episode takes place in Boston and New Jersey is an interesting recipe. It's Spike Lee, a touch of Scorsese's Mean Streets, and the Boston Strangler.
That almost makes me want to rewatch all three of these episodes again just to pick out like these influences. And I love that your mind was thinking about that even cinematically on top of as a device to be able to tell these stories in even a more clear visual way, which makes so much sense. So the episode 2, obviously, Shandra Levy, it got embroiled with Gary Condit and the political scandal that it was. And the series points out time and time again is that this story took off, just like Lacey Peterson. And then we have this other story that doesn't take off at all. And it's almost like you're campaigning to get eyes on something and how important that is, because it really is life or death in terms of getting these things solved.
Yeah. I mean, I think the sooner you can get the word out, the greater your chances are of finding someone alive. Someone said to me, it's not really the first 48, it's the first 24. And in the case of Shandra, you had a big, salacious, splashy story. And then when it was disclosed about her alleged affair with the congressman, that added another layer. And, the more he would protest, the more that the fire was burning more and more for all of the wrong reasons. Joyce Chiang was someone who was loved by her coworkers, her family, her friends. She worked at the immigration naturalization. Her family being first generation here, and she was born here, but her parents were not. And to see that her story it wasn't the A story. It wasn't the sizzle story. And thus, to honor her and her memory is a big part of doing an episode on her, and how closely she shares a DNA in so many ways with Shandra Levy's story.
Yeah. And you have her brother in this, which I found very powerful as well. Her brother was
Roger.
Yeah, Roger. And, you can just really kind of feel the intensity and the passion for his sister. And there was such an interesting detail in this of the tagging on the brick wall that said, "Good day, JC. May I never miss the thrill of being near you." And a lot of people thought, could that be Joyce? Is that what the JC means? And it's one of those little mysterious pieces of this case, which I found fascinating.
In each of the episodes, there's like red herrings that show up, right? That you think is like, oh, that's the clue.
Yeah.
And in the case of Roger discovering that graffiti, it definitely is a cliffhanger. And I'm not going to tell people, because they have to watch the series. What you find out.
No, I mean, it is, but it's one of those really interesting details that kind of locks you in to this story even more. To take it back to bringing this to ABC News Studios, your initial idea, you were fascinated with hidden figures. You get the green light to do something like this, and then the work begins. And, you have to research all of these and find out these little details that fascinate you as an artist. What were the things that stood out to you in your research process that you were like, this blows my mind?
When we started production and talking to families and law enforcement, journalists, sociologists, they all came on board. We didn't have to twist people's arms to participate. And then with family members, they would say, well, we have a cassette tape of Joyce singing. We have this footage. They were so amazing about supplying materials that had not been seen or heard before, because they understood the intention of the series was not just to look at the inequity of treatment, but it really was to shine a light on someone who was special, who was
Yeah.
loved, and who lost their life too soon.
And in a lot of ways, this carries the torch for them and the voices that they don't have anymore, which was the thing that even in the third episode, I was very moved by in the interviews that were done for this. Now, the third episode juxtaposes the Craigslist killer, I believe his name is Philip Markoff, with the tagged killer. And this is another really gripping story where the tagged killer was using this website. I had never heard of tagged, where, you know, he was targeting sex workers, where you could go online and there was a woman that unfortunately, you know, many women that lost their lives. And I think there probably are women that we haven't even discovered yet in the case of the tagged killer.
Yeah, I also agree that I think that there are more victims. You know, when he went to trial, he was found guilty for the murders of several young women, and then they found another body. Um, uh, and so Tagged was like a dating app, and it could also be a hookup app.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that third episode, it's kind of the really big meta conversation, because we're looking at these serial killers and we're also looking at their victims. And in the case of the Craigslist killer, you have a woman who was a sex worker who went to the police and they took her seriously. With Tagged, we actually spoke to the one survivor
Yeah.
who went to the police and they didn't take her seriously. And it's unfortunate because there was a lot of dots that had to be connected, because Khalil Wheeler Weaver killed women in several different cities. It wasn't just one place in New Jersey. But after Tiffany Taylor went to the police, they discounted her. And then later he goes on to unfortunately kill Sarah Butler, who really was a college student. She went on this app. She was looking for a relationship. And then this guy kind of says, well, hey, go out with me and I'll give you money.
Yeah. And she got, and the sad thing was that she got scared at first and
Yes.
didn't meet up for the first time, and her instincts were correct in that moment, and then unfortunately met up with him that second time. And I believe Khalil was from a law enforcement family, correct?
Yes, he was.
I
And he was a security guard, but he wanted to become a policeman. He's
Yeah,
the
that's
youngest black serial killer ever in America.
it's definitely not something that you should aim for ever. I mean, like what a sad commentary on this man's life. I just kept thinking during watching that third episode in particular is that, you know, this is going to do a lot of good for anybody that watches this. I think this is such an important, all of three of these are important stories to tell, but also it just shows how on guard that we have to be a lot of the times, and to trust your instincts, and to also try to look under every stone and don't just go for the shiny object. Like, all of these stories are so important, and what could have been done if there was more attention immediately. And I was just wondering, like, what do you hope comes from this, which, by the way, are you already planning on working on more of these? Because I was watching it going, oh, I wonder if you could do the Idaho killer or Jean Benet, or I was already kind of putting stories together in my head, and I didn't know if you were already looking down the road like that.
We would love to do more. It's been an incredible experience working with ABC News Studios and Robin, and we have a bunch more. And people have been reaching out since the series dropped, saying, you know, what about this story? Do you know about my brother, my sister, my cousin? So it's really sad that
Yeah.
there are more stories out there. What I hope always is that people gain a little bit more empathy for these families and these victims, that they don't victim blame or shame, When you understand who they were. I think sometimes when you come from certain communities, you're called troubled, you're a runaway. Um, and what we show is that these were people who were beautifully human, who met the wrong people, and they should be honored and treasured just like anyone else. Robin Roberts always says that she hopes that with the series that your reaction will lead to action. And
Yes.
so if that were to happen, if in the case of Evelyn Hernandez, someone who witnessed what happened were to call the number that's at the end of our episode, then it's a job well done for me and the entire team who has worked so hard to make certain that we did right by telling the stories of people who are no longer with us.
I think that's what I specifically loved as well is that you did tell the stories of these victims. I think a lot of times stories can be so sensationalized and we tend to focus on the serial killer or the murderer. And I sometimes feel like I don't need to understand that because I don't think you can ever understand when somebody purposely takes a life. But these victims, you want to hear their stories and they have these kind of beautiful stories. They are so loved by their family members and their friends, and you still sense the pain in these interviews, like I said, years and years later. And that to me is what impress is like going for there's a sense of realness to this entire endeavor that you don't see with a lot of other true crime docuseries. It has so much heart.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to believe that's a hallmark of all the projects that I do, is that I don't want to look at the outside. I really want to explore the interiority of the character, and who they were, not just the headline, not just a statistic, but who the individual was and who they meant to the people who loved them.
We were joking around before we started that you were like, "Oh, I've had 3 careers by this point," and I just thought, well, that's just such a fascinating life. And I just wondered when you were little, where did you think you would wind up when you were grown up?
Oh, that's a crazy question because I thought I'd be on Broadway. I was a, I know, it's like,
There's still
okay,
time. There's still
there's
time.
still
We got
time.
it.
Okay, the fourth career. And it's funny because I've done some, I produced the film Precious and this series and things that are kind of intense and heavy,
Yeah,
but they have a lot of heart too, that are about the human
experience.
experience. But yeah, that was what I thought, as a young Lisa's dream.
A couple more things. You really do have like this visual sense, or this docuseries does have this great visual sense about it. And how do you separate the story from the technical aspect of putting something like even you talking about Fincher or Hitchcock? Those are two separate parts of your brain dealing with emotion and with the technical. How do you, as an artist, kind of marry those two? And were you satisfied with the results in this series?
Well, everything is always in service of story. How can we make the characters more vivid and fully realized? How can we elevate a genre of true crime that has a lot of predictable tropes? So, I wanted to mix it up. And that involved, of course, using the standard elements like interview, archive, haunting music, but to also add a framing in terms of how the interviews are shot, in how we shoot B-roll, and to, I think that's when my background as a narrative producer kind of comes into play, because I am interested in um, visuals that reinforce the story, and in, I think, make it more haunting and realized in the production.
Yeah, I mean, but it is definitely haunting, and these are really kind of horrific stories. But you do kind of imbue them with such heart that that's what I kind of take away from this. Even in the third one, where I was left very sad, or I got very kind of emotional in my feelings about that third episode, it just kind of hit me, and I think I had watched them all back to back, and the third one just kind of walloped me. But at the same time, it did something different than I've seen with most docu series, where it really painted these victims, you got a full sense of who they were in a 43-minute episode, which is so hard to do. Like, I'm sure your editing had to have been insane on this.
We had an incredible story producer and editors, and we spent a lot of time and working with the team at ABC News Studios to make certain that the focus was delivering what audiences expect in a true crime story, but was also incorporating these other threads into the telling. And like in every project I ever do, there's a little piece of me up on the screen. I have had family members who have lost their lives, and they were not resolved, and so I had a very deep connection to these families because I also live and am at times haunted by that loss.
Yeah. I think you can see that on these episodes. Folks, this is on Hulu right now. All 3 episodes. We want you to go support this because we want more work like this. And I have to tell you, I don't know what's going on over there at ABC News Studios this past year, but they've had some excellent work. I watch TV for a living now, and every time ABC News Studios, it's like they're really ramping up their game, and I just wasn't prepared for this. I was kind of delightfully surprised. I highly recommend this for you guys. I left out so many details so you could actually be surprised in the series. But my gosh, thank you for spending so much time with us today. You are a true artist in my eyes. And by the way, hopefully Broadway won't take you. Hopefully we can keep you to doing this and you don't get stolen by Broadway at this point.
I don't know. I kind of hear Broadway calling.
Yeah, no, that's not. That's the band in the other room. That's not Broadway. How are you going to celebrate the release after this weekend? Are you going to give yourself a little vacation or celebration, or you just keep on working?
Keep working and also celebrating with the team. There's so many wonderful people who also put their hearts into this. You're seeing that love, you're seeing that energy, and I really, I so value you for kind of tapping into that intention that we wrap this production in. It is not easy to spend a year telling these stories and editing and interviewing and working to make it right for these families. And everyone who worked on this was so dedicated. So I'm going to celebrate with them. I think I might take a bubble bath and
not with the team, just it's a solo bubble bath. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is job well done. Lisa Cortes, you guys, this is a must on your list. It's Murder Has Two Faces, all 3 episodes streaming now on Hulu. And I hope to get to talk to you again down the line on your next project. I really appreciate this.
Thank you so much, Ryan. You are so good. Forget about the bad.
Yeah,
you are so good.
Okay, I'm going to tell my dad you said that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Get him on